So if you had a lot of kids, like both our families did, those meals were important. I mean, that really impacted your ability to make that trip.
And it was arguably the most Christ-like thing that they did, that they fed people when they were teaching them, and then they cut it out.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Difficult Childhood. We are excited to be back with you. In this podcast, we talk about what it's like growing up as one of Jehovah's Witnesses and the before and after experience of separating yourself from the organization as an adult. My name is Fallon, and I'm joined by my lifelong best friend, Jason. Hey, buddy.
Howdy, howdy.
How are you?
I'm very well. I'm having a great day. I'm excited about getting this one down. We had some technical issues, and now we're finally getting it done. And this will be our third attempt to record this, or fourth. So we're excited to get into it.
We should have it down pat by now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, technology's not always our friend, but we got it. It's working. We're doing it. Yeah. So today we're going to talk about a few things that have changed in the organization within our lifetime and maybe a little bit before us. One of the major sources of frustration, as far as talking with members that have left the organization, one of the major sources of frustration is all the subjects that the organization has flip-flopped on or changed their stance on over the years without any kind of apology or explanation. So we picked just a few that stood out to us, and we thought we would kind of recap those.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you said there about and no apology. And as a lot of us have seen the most recent annual meeting, the newest governing body member, he got up on the stage and said, well, whenever there's new light, there's no reason to apologize because it's God giving it to us. So even when they get things wrong, and he followed that up with, we're not infallible. In fact, I'll probably just show the clip. That's okay. It's not us. We're doing our job right, even when we get it wrong. What a ridiculous position, and the arrogance to have that attitude. I know that kind of connects into one of our other items here too, so I won't step on too much.
Well, knowing this, then we are not embarrassed about adjustments that are made, nor is an apology needed for not getting it exactly right previously. We understand this is how Jehovah operates. He reveals matters gradually when it is needed. And also, the governing body is neither inspired nor infallible, and so it can err in doctrinal matters or in organizational direction.
Yeah, basically they're saying, even if we did a total 180, if you feel any sort of way about that, that's a you problem and not an us. So thanks for invalidating every emotion I've ever had. Appreciate that. Okay, so what Jason was referring to when he talked about no need for apologizing, that really hits home for a lot of people as far as their stance on organ donation. In the 60s, in the Watchtower, they basically said that if you accepted an organ transplant, regardless of the blood situation, just the organ itself, that you would be surviving off of the flesh of another human, and that would be likened to a form of cannibalism. So no ifs, ands, or buts. That was a no-no. Fast forward a few years, they kind of pumped the brakes on that. And in the 80s, they totally changed their stance. In the Watchtower of 1980 from March 15th, there was a question from the readers. And the question was, what action would be taken by the congregation as far as a judicial committee being formed if a baptized member were to accept an organ transplant? So they basically just, with no real explanation, did a flip-flop on their previous stance, and they said, well, while some people might feel that it's a form of cannibalism, the Bible or Jesus spoke figuratively about consuming flesh, and there's no biblical command that pointedly forbids the taking in of another human tissue. So no disciplinary action would be taken. So, as I said before, if you were Uncle Roger in the 60s and you needed a kidney transplant or a liver transplant or lung transplant or whatever, and you chose not to accept it because they said, no, that's wrong. That's cannibalism. It's forbidden.
Yeah.
And you died. And then 15 years later, they said, oh, that's okay. You can live. It's fine. It's absolutely valid for family members to have some really intense feelings about that. And the fact that they say, oh, we don't need to apologize for that. Well, Uncle Roger's in the ground. So I think you do need to apologize.
Absolutely. And it speaks to the sheer arrogance of these positions they take. Yes, we are right. Even though they say we're infallible, they don't act like it. And then they make decisions for people that go beyond the Bible. And those decisions, that taking that autonomy away, costs people their lives. And of course, I'm sure they argue, well, Jehovah will fix it in the end and resurrect you for obeying for when you guys got it wrong, for obeying when you guys got it wrong. Arguably, yes, if you believe in that sort of thing. But wow, just if you don't know, then just shut up.
Well, and in the same article from the 60s where it was talking about cannibalism, it even went beyond survival. They talk about how they don't think it's permissible for your body to be used for scientific research. Now they do say that they believe, when the flesh dies, the soul dies. So there's no spirit attached to your body after you're dead. You're just the old flesh suit. But in the article, it says, while Christians might allow apparently necessary surgery to be performed, such as the removal of a diseased limb, they do not needlessly mutilate their bodies post-mortem for scientific research. So
can't even donate your body to science, huh?
Yeah, to try to save someone else from the thing that you died of.
Wow.
So it's just so offensive in so many ways.
Arrogance.
Yeah. So that's a big one. That's a big turnaround.
The next one was convention food service. And I remember we looked it up, it was 1991, they stopped doing this. And I remember the announcement from the platform at the Kingdom Hall. I used to volunteer in the food service department, and I was 11 years old the last time they did it. But they announced it that next year they would not be feeding people at the conventions, local or international, any of those conventions. They used to have food. You'd have lunch and dinner taken care of for you. Excuse me, breakfast and lunch, I believe. And it was arguably the most Christ-like thing that they did, that they fed people when they were teaching them, and then they cut it out.
Yeah. So if you don't know, once a year, witnesses have a large convention, and it varies in length. They have some that are 2 days, or when we were kids, it was 3 full days, all day Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And they provided just free food. Now, to be clear, they weren't serving filet, but for lunch, you got like a hot ham and cheese sandwich, or, a roast beef sandwich and chips and a soda. I think they served soft serve ice cream. And then for breakfast, you could get coffee or juice and a Danish, or just, a little bit. But it was really critical for a lot of witness families because, number one, most of them lived very, very simply. And that's a nice way of saying we were all poor, or most of us were poor, on a budget. And that's a lot of time off of work and a lot of traveling for some families. Your family and mine both had to leave a day, if not a day and a half early, to get there, to check into the hotel and get prepared. So if you had a lot of kids, like both our families did, those meals were important. I mean, that really impacted your ability to make that trip.
Because you're looking at, that was back when they were 4-day conventions every year, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. That means you had to get packed up and go on Wednesday. Then you had the convention, and then you had to go back home and probably, take Monday to, recoup. So you're talking about taking almost for 4 days off at least. And you guys have a massive investment for. Well, you can tell how wealthy we weren't is that our two families were staying in the Motel 6.
Oh yeah,
And
those are
it
the
was,
days.
man, but it was still so fun to us. We're in a hotel. We didn't know
Oh
the difference.
yeah,
But it was a huge burden for parents, and particularly because Jehovah's Witnesses are often working super super hard on their few
yeah,
work days because they've got to spend all this extra time going to 3 meetings a week back then, or they called it 5 meetings, but you know what I mean, and going
right.
out in service. And so then you've got everybody already strapped for cash, or many people are, and then you say, okay, we'll feed you just like Jesus does, and then they cut that. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, for a lot of families, that was their summer vacation.
It's depressing.
I
Yeah,
mean,
it really
it's
was.
really depressing, but and I mean, of course, we've heard various reasons given for why they discontinued it. Um, they never officially said why. Obviously, a large factor of it is cost.
Mhm.
But then I've also heard people say that whenever the convention was hosted in a more metropolitan area that had a large homeless population, that they would get a large influx of homeless people that would come into the program, just seeking something to eat. Um, I don't know that that's really the case, but if
Feeding
so,
the poor? I don't think so.
shame on them. How dare you? Yeah. So it's really sad.
It was a it was a mean move, and of course, as you probably know, I've worked in the accountants for the accounts departments for congregations and also for conventions and assemblies, and this is how it works: the money gets brought in by the local brothers and sisters that deposit into the contribution boxes, and then that money is taken, and then they spend that money on what the expenses were. So this way conventions ideally don't cost the organization anything. They don't want the
Right.
organization to, it looks like they're paying to put on these conventions, but they're not. That's the local JWs that are putting in the money for the rental of the large facility. Sometimes I remember for the Tucson Convention Center, it was $60,000-$70,000 for that weekend. And so they'd be renting the facility. Then they would, all the expenses, they'd be covering all of them. And then the balance after all the expenses is always, you'd hear this accounts report at the end of the convention. They go, so far we've taken an X amount of dollars. It cost Y amount of dollars. And now we're sending on the remaining balance to the organization so that they can help with the worldwide work. That's what they always said. What that really
Right.
meant was that the excess money went to the headquarters, who had invested nothing in this convention other than creating the content for it, which is usually just regurgitated. It's just revomited stuff from the year before. So it's the same stuff you
Right.
heard the year before. And then they're able to create these boring talks and then it's a cash cow. You go put on dozens of these in the US and all over the world. I don't know how many, but just money would pour in every summer from these. And um, a huge problem with that was that they're spending so much money on food that there was less money to go to the headquarters. And that's where they are. They're a business. They're a bottom line business.
That ham and cheese sandwich and lemon lime Shasta, it really put us in the red. So the next one on my list is the identification of the faithful and discreet slave. So when we use the term the faithful and discreet slave, that's based on the scripture from Matthew 24:45. And when witnesses use the term faithful and discreet slave, they are talking about a group of witnesses that are God's specific channel. Um, they are the ones that receive the spiritual food directly from God and then distribute it to the congregation via printed materials or talks or presentations, um, multimedia broadcast, things like that. So for many, many years, our whole lives, the general consensus that the identity of the faithful and discreet slave was all of the anointed members of the organization, those who had a heavenly calling or those who did not plan on spending eternity on earth.
So those who
Then
lived
in
on Earth at the time, who were live at the time on Earth, and they were of what they call the anointed, or the 144,000, which was usually down to about
yeah,
15,000 or so at any given time. So those people that were still
right,
alive on Earth, is what you're saying, would be would be the faithful and discreet slave, regardless of whether or not they were on the governing body. Is that
correct? Or so we
yeah?
thought. So,
Or so the
in
Germans would have us
2013,
believe.
so in 2013, one of the study editions of the Watchtower released an article about who really is the faithful and discreet slave. So, as I said, up to this point, we thought it was just all of the anointed class, which is men, women, etc., etc. Well, again, just totally flip-flopping. In the third paragraph, it says, in the past, our publications have said that the slave, is represented by all anointed Christians on earth. And then you skip to paragraph 9, and it says, but do all anointed Christians make up the faithful slave? No. So the first reason that it gives is that since not all anointed Christians have a role serving at the headquarters or dispensing spiritual food, they would not be considered part of the slave class. Some of them serve on a local level as elders of the congregation, so it couldn't be them. But then the second part, which, as you know, I find extra offensive as a woman, the second part says, among the anointed class, this is a quote, are humble sisters who would never try to assume the role of teachers in the congregation. So you're a female, you are of the anointed class, which means that God has specifically called you separate from the rest of mankind. He has found you like worthy and approved to rule in heaven as a king or priest in a glorified spirit body at the right hand of God with Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
But don't you dare try to write a magazine article or package up bound books. No, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to be part of the
Shut your
slave
female mouth.
because you've got a double X chromosome, and that is a no-no. So, yeah, super offensive. So then the article concludes,
awful.
well, if it's not all the anointed class, who is it? So then they say it's specifically the governing body, which is just a panel of 9 men, just human men, not anything special. So it's kind of circular reasoning to say who is the faithful and discreet slave? It's the governing body. But who decides that? The governing body. Make it make sense.
It's insane.
It can't.
No. It reminds me of my friend Charlotte sent me this screenshot up from the website, and it said something about how, I'll show it on the screen, how grateful we are. What are you talking about? For these gifts in men. And they're talking like they're not the ones writing this. It's their press release. And they write this, how grateful we are for these glorious gifts from God. And we're humble, but we're so grateful. And you're like, you guys are writing this. Stop it.
They're the first line of defense against evil. They're the guardians of the unguarded. They're the writers of their own press releases, Morty. They're a bunch of drama queens.
And it's very much like when they say, according to the Watchtower, the wise course would be to, you write the Watchtower. Shush. It's just so condescending. And then they gave a list of all the members of the governing body, and these are the gifts in men that God has bestowed upon us. The arrogance. I mean, out of that, if there's one thing that's hit me as a theme of this episode, it is the arrogance of those dudes. All right, which one do you want to hit next?
So the next one, let's just talk about service time. That's just a little quick one, but it's important for a lot of people. We've talked before about how Jason and I, yeah, Jason and I both at separate times, even overlapping times at some point, both served as regular pioneers, and that is a full-time volunteer service where you pledge to spend so many hours per month involved in door-to-door ministry or conducting Bible studies or teaching or just converting whoever you think you can convert. Mm-hmm. So for years and years, the monthly requirement for that was 90 hours. Then after so many years, they lowered it to 70. And then after that, I think it was down to 50. I couldn't even tell you what it is now. And then just recently, the governing body made an announcement that we're not going to keep track of hours at all. We're on the honor system now. So it was kind of feather ruffling for people that were literally killing themselves to work a full-time job or raise a family and meet these strict hour requirements. And to just say, oh, none of that matters, kind of a slap in the face. But we were talking about the reason, or what we feel like the reason is behind this.
We suspect. We shan't say, we will not pretend to know things we don't know. But.
Yeah.
Go, I stepped on you again. Okay, thank you. We suspect that after the pandemic, it became very difficult. Like, well, if you're going to take 2 years off of door to door, you're not going to get those people back out to go door to door. And the service time is going to take a huge dive. Once you've had a taste for Saturdays off, oh my goodness, you're not going back to that. And I think we both think that their time just crashed so horribly that their report would have been an embarrassment. And now, after decades of demanding hourly reports, in fact, there's consequences for you if you don't turn in your hourly report or have enough hours in. There's shaming, there's loss of so-called privileges, there's all kinds of awful stuff that you could even lose. Like, if you're planning to get married, someone would be looking at you and going, I don't know, he only did 7 hours on average in the ministry. And they always would ask the elder about who they're going to marry and what's the service time like. There's so many consequences for not doing that. And then now, after all those decades of counting time, it doesn't really matter. It's fine.
Yeah, it's suddenly quality and not quantity. Is it though?
Well, when low service time was making individuals look bad, it was, that's important. What are you doing? Get cracking. Right. When it's making the governing body or the organization look bad, and then suddenly it's forgiven and it's a new arrangement. It's the righteous way to go. How dare you?
It's new light, buddy. Wink.
The audacity.
God. Yeah, I just, that whole thing is just bananas. And it's not just, which I'm sure we'll talk about in the future, it's not just ministry hours that tanked after the pandemic. It was Bible studies, meeting attendance specifically, even when the meetings were reopened for in-person attendance. No. When you spend a year attending on Zoom, to suddenly make yourself get back out there 3 times a week, no, it's never going to be the same. I'm sorry.
Absolutely not. I remember my dad talking about how great the ministry was doing during the pandemic. And he said how it's amazing. It's really proof of God's spirit. And I realized, they're all doing this ministry, like letter writing. They can just be kicking it at home and doing a little doodle, filling out stuff, sending letters, just counting. And there was just all these extra things they could count that they were so strict before. Well, the hours are good when you're just sitting at your desk, and kind of chilling. I work from home. It's easy as hell. Come on. Ridiculous.
I agree. We'll mark that off our top 7 list.
Well, scribble it off angrily.
We were going to make this we were going to make this a top 10 list. But the farther we got into all these points, the more frustrated we got. We were like, let's just stop at 7. Let's make it lucky 7.
I can only be so angry.
That's right.
I don't want to be the angry apostate, just, all right, I got to calm down. All right, what do you think? There was one here that really surprised me, and maybe we'll save that for last. It literally was something I had never learned before we did our research for this episode. And it was at such a core of the religion, but we'll save that for later. What do you think? The blood fractions, shall we?
Yeah, let's dive in there. Take it away.
Well, if you've got a problem and you've got all these people dying from not getting blood transfusions, but you can do certain procedures that involve some blood, how can you make that okay? If you can't just, if you're the governing body, you can't just say, okay, blood transfusions are fine because so many people have died. You have to have a better understanding. So what's happening is, as technology was evolving, everybody and advancing, everybody became more aware of how many blood cells are in mother's milk from nursing, are in just traded back and forth naturally in life. And if you're drinking cow's milk, you're drinking blood cells, which is kind of gross. I think I'm going to switch to oat milk, but it became more and more clear that this notion that consuming blood or any fractions of blood or taking it into your body was absurd, and it would not have been a thing that biblically they were thinking about medical procedures. They had no concept of that back then. So applying it to medical procedures when literally the Bible just said, bleed the animal before you eat it, kind of insane. So they needed to work around.
Yeah. So yeah, our whole lives it was like no blood, don't even think about it. And then like Jason said, as science progressed, they had to kind of tweak their stance a little bit. And so then they said, well, it's a conscience matter as long as it's not red blood cells. So fractions was like the hot word. Plasma is just a fraction of blood. Platelets are just a fraction of blood. Just madness. It's blood. Blood is blood is blood. It doesn't matter what color the cell is. It's one part of a whole thing. So even if you just take a fraction of it, it's still blood. So
it's still coming from the thing you weren't supposed to be touching. You know?
Right. And I'm thrilled for the members who were benefiting from this. Of course, I'm sure there was tons of people whose lives were saved because they were able to take blood. But then to think of the thousands of people that this new light came too late for is just so upsetting. It's
absolutely. And to think of the sorry, again, the arrogance. Yeah, it is upsetting. I apologize. I lost my thought. I got too angry and thoughts fell out of my head.
It happens. Well, it's not just blood transfusions. That's what witnesses talk about most. But it's any procedure that has to do with the handling of blood. So a lot of people, non-witnesses, when their baby is born, they will bank the cord blood because it's really concentrated in stem cells. And later, if that child were to have some kind of leukemia or serious illness, autoimmune, whatever, the harvesting of those stem cells from the cord blood can cure them, or at least treat their illness or prolong life or things like that. But witnesses don't allow for blood to be stored outside the body for any amount of time. Now they do allow for you to do, if you have kidney disease and you are on dialysis, they will allow that. And they say that's only because it runs in a continuous circuit. So even though it's leaving your body, it's a nonstop closed circuit that pumps it back into you after being filtered. And it's kind of the same technology behind like Cell Saver during surgery. It collects your blood loss, cleans it, and gives it right back to you. But a lot of surgeons will ask you to donate your own blood so that if something were to go wrong during surgery, you can have your own blood transfused back into you. And we were always told, no, that's a no-no because it's being stored outside of your body. Madness. Yeah. Total madness.
Absolutely. And then on to the fractions portion. Why would it ever be okay to get fractions for any procedure when you're getting fractions from where? From somebody who donated their whole blood. So why wouldn't that make it tainted? The whole thing just makes zero sense.
There's no logic behind it.
Oh dear. That's a good one.
Definitely marking that off the list.
The body juice.
Juice is loose.
Oh, I gotta go back over here to my thing here. All right. Changes. There we go. Changes.
Oh, I swear I was right there.
There we go.
Bowie.
Baptism.
Dun, 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 the plunge.
I remember, and this is the New World Translation version of what Jesus tells people to do to get baptized. I was baptized when I was 12. I think you were like 11.
11.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he says, "Go therefore, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit." And then the Watchtower version of because that's what you're supposed to do, baptize in the name of those three. But then the Watchtower adds to what Jesus said because Jesus apparently couldn't crack it. It wasn't quite
right
there. And so they have these two questions that are asked to, be at a convention or an assembly, and there'll be, say, 20 people standing. This is all stuff I'm kind of just explaining for the, but you'll have 20 people or so standing in front of the convention center, and they will all stand up and say, "We're going to ask two questions of you." And those people are the ones that want to get baptized that day. And you then have to answer these two questions. And one of them is that, have you repented of your sins and dedicated your life to Jehovah and accepted his way of salvation through Jesus Christ? That sort of matches the earlier thing. The second question, I have notes. Do you understand that your baptism identifies you as one of Jehovah's Witnesses in association with Jehovah's organization, as in the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses? It's weird
Right.
Jesus never included that as important.
Yeah.
Do you have any Christian thoughts on that?
What an interesting thing.
Uh-oh.
Well, so many things.
I apologize. I think I've lost audio. Okay, where were we?
So yes, my take on what you just read about the change in baptism wording. My take on it is, number one, Jesus does not need any organization to improve upon what he said needs to be done as far as baptism. Number two, we call them baptismal candidates because that's what the organization calls them. And the fact that you have to ask for permission from a man-made organization to be baptized is so ridiculous and offensive. Because they're absolutely.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Why? Like.
Well, I had not thought about that at all from my perspective. That doesn't enter into it, but yeah, from a spiritual perspective, that's absolutely absurd.
Yeah. When I was talking with my husband, who has never been a witness, about the baptismal process, he asked me about it, and I said, well, first you have to ask for permission, or you tell them that you want to, and then you have to get approved. And he said, who's approving you? Like, if you made a dedication to God and you want to and be baptized, he's like, why would you have to ask permission? Or who a man is giving their approval for you to be baptized, like to be in union with God? And of course, when I thought about it like that, I was like, oh, that sounds terrible. But it is. It's a pretty rigorous process. It's an extensive interview process, multiple interviews. They're quizzing you. They're making sure that you're properly indoctrinated, adequately indoctrinated. So yeah, it's not like you can just say, "Hey, I want to get baptized," and just wade into the water. It's a whole thing.
Well, your husband Keith has such an interesting perspective because he would know, when the things get really daffy. We've just been so used to it.
Oh yeah.
That we go, oh yeah, that's the way it is, and then but it throws up a warning flag for him because this wasn't something he just grew up with. That's very interesting.
Yeah, he's a good sounding board. I'll tell him something. I'll be like, does this sound crazy? And he'll be like, yes, it does. But that wasn't always the case. That's something that they flip-flopped on. Originally, they did baptize in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So that's a big shift.
They become more and more a corporation that wants members rather than a channel to have a relationship. If you believe in God, then you should be able to have that relationship, and it's a personal one, not
anyway. That's a big push towards less relationship and more religion. It's it's a big legalistic push, and there's no need for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll mark that off.
Well, that brings us to our very last one.
Oh, yeah. The good one.
This is the one that surprised me. And I want to say, obviously, I'm an atheist, so I don't see things from a Christian point of view. A lot of Christian religions will go, so that's a normal thing. But this is a huge shift for Jehovah's Witnesses. It's that Jehovah's Witnesses, as recent as 1954, I realize that's not recent at all. It's 70 years ago. But it was, after my father was born, Jehovah's Witnesses had a different teaching on who you could worship.
Right.
And now the teaching is you only pray to God. You only pray to Jehovah God.
The Father.
That's it, by name. You never pray to anyone but the Father.
Right.
And a lot of other beliefs teach that you can pray to Jesus, the Son. And they, back then, taught that you could worship either Jesus or God. And now they believed very, very distinctly, they're not Trinitarians. They believe that the God, the Father, is a different person from the Son.
Yeah.
And the Holy Spirit is just an active force and not a person.
Right.
So the notion that they shifted from saying, okay, you can worship two beings, two deities, essentially, to saying, no, you can only worship one, is on par with, Scientology saying, okay, it's not just Xenu anymore. We've got two guys, or something like that. Or it's just a very, very alien thing to me. And it's something that's been sanitized from our history. I've never heard of this idea that back when Jehovah's Witnesses would worship Jesus. Now, if you did that from the platform, I mean, what would happen? If you prayed to Jesus,
you'd immediately be escorted out of the building, off property. And that's one of the big differences between Jehovah's Witnesses and almost all other mainstream Christian religions or beliefs, organizations, whatever. Witnesses don't recognize the deity of Jesus, period. They believe that his role as the Son came from being a created being. They believe that God the Father created him out of nothing. They call him the firstborn of creation, that he didn't exist, and then because of the Father, he did exist. So they don't assign him any kind of godness. Now, they do believe that he, came in flesh to earth and that he was imbued with supernatural powers, but that was simply because of his relationship to the Father, not because he was any part of like a Godhead or anything. So
right.
That's just such a foundational concept for almost all Christianity, is just, the fullness of Jesus, whether you believe that they're three separate or they're three in one or whatever. So for them to say, yeah, you can worship him, in part of your worship, you can pray to him. And then to say, no, not at all. That's huge. I mean,
it is.
That's as big of a concept as you can get.
Right. I mean, that's the core. Who do you worship? And to acknowledge that they got it wrong, and then that they were supposed to be, they claimed that, when Jesus came down to check on his domestics, they call it, closer, to 1914. Before that, though, and he came down and went, okay, who is it? Like, my dates were a little wrong there. Who is it? But around that time, who is it that's really handling it right? Who's getting it right? Who understands how God wants to be worshipped, and who's handling the situation?
There can only be one.
You guys.
Gotta be the JW.
Gotta be. It's the Highlander rules all the time. We worked it in again. It's just nuts that they think that they were the ones that Jesus would have selected when they didn't even agree on and couldn't even get right who they thought they were worshiping. What a core belief what a bunch of dum-dums. It's constant arrogance.
Yeah. And this didn't make our list, but I feel like it's worth an honorable mention. A flip-flop subject is that many years ago, they used the cross in their worship. My mom told me that her mother had a cross and a crown, a pin, like a lapel pin, that she always wore to the meetings. And then when they did away with that, she just put it in like her dresser drawer, never brought it out again. So even something as basic as that, they said, yeah, it's okay. Oh, just kidding. It's not okay.
Wow.
So.
And the humor of it to me is that they made such a big deal about Jesus died on a stake, a one vertical thing. But historically, all the evidence points that Romans hung people on crosses. They did. And they made all these quotes, or they made all these supposed assertions that, historically, no, Romans never did that. And
No,
the cross isn't
the
even the
Greek
right
word
thing.
staros means an upright stake.
That's what it was.
That's it.
Glad some of us read books around here. I remember listening to a historian, and he was talking about that very thing. That the Romans were using actual crosses. They, Spartacus got it right. They were hanging people up there with crosses. So Jesus, if he had been real, or if he was real, sorry, I didn't mean to. He would have died on a cross.
Right.
So. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean I would, if I love Jesus, I would want to hang the thing that killed him around my neck. I mean, but still, if you do, cool, because it's accurate. And they made such a big deal out of it not being the cross.
It was just one more push to separate like us and them. Like, oh, all other Christian religions use the cross, but we don't because we're different. And we're different because we're the right one.
Absolutely.
But I wish that
you just have to.
I wish that a lot of the passion that they put into arguing about whether it was one upright stake or two cross beams, I wish that they took that passion and that drive and put it into sharing what it really what it represents or what it really means. Like, as a Christian, I wish that they shared more about what grace truly means, what the cross represents in the big picture, rather than just the physical angles of the wood that he was impaled on.
Yeah, I can appreciate it. Even as an atheist, I can appreciate that. That is the priority that should have been the priority. And they're quibbling over whether, what shape it was.
Right.
It's absurd.
Yeah. Good time. So I think we'll wrap it up there. As always, thank you for sharing this time with us, tuning in. If there's a subject that you would like us to discuss specifically, or you think it's something that hasn't been covered enough by other channels, just feel free to drop us a line, a comment, an email, anything like that, and we'll do our best to incorporate it in a future episode.
Goodbye, friends, and thank you so much for watching.
Bye, friends.